The forest was quiet in a way that made the cubs uneasy. No wind moved the leaves. No insects sang in the grass. Even the river nearby seemed to hold its breath. It was the kind of silence that made the fur on the back of the neck rise and stay standing. The cubs of the Red Fawn clan had been told never to wander this far from the den. They knew the rules. They knew the dangers. But rules meant little when curiosity took hold of young hearts. And tonight something had caught their attention. Something strange. Something that did not belong. They had seen her through the trees earlier. She was tall and pale compared to the warm brown and gold tones of the forest. Her clothing was strange and smooth without fur or hide. She moved without the sound of snapping twigs or rustling branches. She did not smell like prey. She did not smell like predator. Her scent was clean and cold like water taken from deep stone wells. The cubs hid behind a tangle of roots and low bushes, watching her every step. Her movements were slow but sure. She carried no visible weapon, yet she walked as if nothing could harm her. One cub whispered that maybe she was lost. Another said no one lost walks like that. She seemed to know exactly where she was going. Her hands touched trees now and then, leaving tiny marks on the bark with a small metal tool. Sometimes she knelt to touch the ground, pressing a strange device to the soil. It blinked with faint green light before she moved on. The smallest cub was trembling, though it was not from fear alone. It was the feeling that they were seeing something they were not meant to see. The elders always spoke of two kinds of life in the world, those who hunted and those who were hunted. This one was neither, and the thought made the cub uneasy. The woman stopped suddenly. Her head turned slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. The cubs froze. Every instinct told them to stay hidden. They could hear their own hearts thumping loudly in their ears. A single branch cracked under the weight of a careless paw. The sound seemed to echo across the still forest. She turned fully toward the noise, and the cubs caught sight of her eyes. They were sharp yet calm. Not the eyes of a hunter ready to kill. Not the eyes of prey ready to flee. Something else entirely. Her gaze passed over the bushes slowly. The air between them felt thick, like before a storm. The older cub pressed a paw over the youngest one's mouth, to keep him quiet. They all hoped she would turn away and leave. Instead, she began to walk toward the bush. Step by step. Her boots made no sound on the mossy ground. Every step felt like a drumbeat in the cub's ears. She stopped only a few paces away. The faint scent of her clothes reached them again. Metal, stone, rain. None of it belonged to the forest. Then she did something none of them expected. She knelt down until her face was level with the bush. The cubs could see the faint glint of something silver in her hair. Her voice, when it came, was soft but carried easily in the stillness. "I know you are there." The cubs froze harder than stone. They did not understand how she could speak in the Red Fawn tongue. Her words were perfect without the clumsy edge most outsiders had. She spoke like someone who had learned the language, not from trade but from birth. One cub's ears twitched in disbelief. Another felt the urge to run, but his legs refused to move. Her calm tone felt like it pressed into their chests, holding them in place. No predator ever spoke that way. No prey ever dared. Slowly she reached into a pouch at her side. Her hand came out holding something wrapped in green leaves. The scent was strange but warm. The smallest cub sniffed without meaning to. It smelled like sweet earth and firelight, but also like nothing they had known before. She set the bundle on the ground in front of the bush and leaned back slightly. Her eyes never left the spot where she knew they hid. "You must be hungry," she said in the same calm voice. "It is safe." The cubs glanced at each other unsure. The oldest one shook his head slightly. The smallest one edged forward before being pulled back. They could not tell if this was a trap or a gift. They could not tell if she meant kindness or something else entirely. The forest around them still held that heavy silence. Even the shadows seemed to be listening. Somewhere far off an owl gave a single low call, then stopped, as if remembering it should not be heard tonight. The woman stayed where she was, waiting, not moving toward them, not moving away. It was the youngest who finally dared to speak, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" She smiled just enough to show she understood the question. Her eyes held a glimmer that was not quite joy and not quite danger. Perhaps something in between. "That is not important," she said. "What matters is that I am here, and I am looking for something that was lost a very long time ago." The cubs felt the air grow even heavier at her words. They did not know what she meant, but they knew deep in their bones that whatever she sought was not a small thing. And they also knew without doubt that this night in the forest would not be forgotten by any of them ever again. The silence after her words felt as deep as the roots of the oldest trees. The cubs stayed hidden, though their bodies ached from crouching for so long. The strange woman kept watching the bush, without moving her head much, as though she knew that even the smallest shift in her eyes would be enough to betray what she was thinking. Her hands rested calmly on her knees, her body relaxed in a way that did not belong to either predator or prey. Predators carried a weight in their stance, ready to strike or chase at any moment. Prey carried tension, coiled like a spring ready to run at the faintest sound. But she was neither. She sat in a stillness that suggested she feared nothing here, yet she also had no hunger in her gaze. The cubs whispered among themselves, their voices no louder than the sound of leaves rubbing together in the night air. "She cannot be a hunter," said the smallest, "because hunters do not offer food before the hunt." "She cannot be prey," said the oldest, "because prey cannot walk alone so deep into this part of the forest." "Then what is she?" asked the middle cub, who was trembling now not because of cold, but because something about her unsettled every instinct in his body. The woman slowly pushed the bundle of leaves closer until it touched the edge of the bush. A faint warmth came from inside it, and the smell seemed to wrap itself around the cubs. It reminded them of the dry heat that rose from the rocks at midday in summer, but mixed with a scent that belonged to no season they knew. She did not push the food on them, nor did she seem to care if they accepted it. Instead, she tilted her head, as if she were listening to something only she could hear in the deep forest. "What are you doing here?" asked the smallest cub, his voice thin and shaking, though he tried to make it sound strong. She looked at him through the leaves, her eyes sharp but calm. "I am looking for something," she said, "something that belongs to a time before your clan walked this land." The words hung heavy in the air like the first drop of rain before a storm. Before the cubs could ask more, she looked past them as if her attention had been pulled by a sound far away. The middle cub followed her gaze, but saw nothing but the dark trees and the faint light of the moons above. Yet the fur on his back stood on end as if something unseen had brushed close to them. He leaned toward the oldest cub, whispering, "I think she hears something." The oldest cub nodded, but kept his eyes on her, waiting for any sign of threat. She reached into another pouch at her side and took out a small round object no bigger than a stone from the riverbed. When she pressed it, her fingers glowed faintly, and a soft hum filled the air. The hum was low at first, but it grew deeper until the ground beneath them seemed to breathe. The cub stepped back in alarm, but she stayed still as if she trusted the sound completely. The hum faded as quickly as it had come, and the forest fell silent again. "What was that?" the smallest cub asked, his voice a little louder than before. "A map," she said, "though not one you can read with your eyes. It tells me where the hollow is." The cubs froze at the word. The hollow was not a place to speak of. The elders said that those who went there never returned, and that the trees themselves refused to grow within its borders. It was a dead place where shadows gathered and did not move even when the sun rose. "You should not go there," the oldest cub said quickly, his ears flat. "No one should go there." She looked at him, and for a moment her eyes softened in a way that almost seemed kind. "That is why I must go," she said. "There are things sleeping there that must be woken before something worse arrives." Her words made no sense to the cubs, yet they carried a weight that made their hearts beat faster. Before they could question her further, she rose to her full height and began walking deeper into the forest, her steps as silent as falling snow. Without speaking, the cubs followed her at a distance. They told themselves they only wanted to make sure she left their territory, but in truth something about her drew them forward as surely as the scent of food draws a starving animal. The forest grew darker as they went. The trees were twisted here, and the air was colder. No bird calls filled the night, and the ground was soft with old leaves that had not been disturbed in many seasons. The woman did not slow, nor did she glance back to see if she was being followed. She moved as though she knew every step of the path. After a time, the cubs noticed the trees around them bore strange marks burned into the bark. The shapes were unfamiliar, like no writing they had seen, yet the marks seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. She touched each one as she passed, and the faint hum returned each time, though softer, now like the heartbeat of something sleeping deep below. The smallest cub wanted to turn back. He whispered to the others that they should leave before the elders noticed they were gone. But the oldest cub shook his head and said not yet. He wanted to know what she was looking for, and why she dared to enter the hollow when even the fiercest hunters would not. At last the trees began to thin, and the ground changed from soft leaf litter to hard cracked soil. No grass grew here. The air smelled of stone and dust, and something else that none of them could name. It was here that the woman stopped and looked around slowly, as if she had reached the place she had been searching for all along. The cubs crouched low behind a broken tree trunk, watching her every move. She walked to the center of the barren clearing and knelt, placing both hands on the ground. For a moment nothing happened. Then the soil beneath her hands began to glow with thin lines of light spreading outward, like the veins of a leaf. The cubs gasped but covered their mouths, quickly afraid to draw attention to themselves. She spoke in a low voice now in words the cubs could not understand. The air seemed to thicken with every sound she made. When she stopped speaking, the light in the soil pulsed once, and then stilled. She sat back on her heels and waited. The cubs held their breath, unsure of what might happen next. The silence in the hollow felt deeper than before, as if the whole world had stopped to listen. And then from somewhere far below came a sound that was not a sound, a deep, slow pulse that they felt in their bones. It was not the call of any creature they knew. It was older. It was heavier. It was like the heartbeat of the earth itself, waking from a long sleep. The woman lowered her head slightly as though in greeting. The cubs exchanged fearful glances, but none of them moved. They had the feeling that whatever she had woken would not return to sleep again. The pulse faded slowly, but its echo seemed to remain in the bones of the cubs long after it stopped. The air in the hollow felt colder now, yet also alive in a strange way, as if something beneath the surface was paying attention to every movement, every breath. The woman did not rise at once. She stayed on her knees, one hand pressed to the ground, eyes closed, as though listening to a voice that only she could hear. Her stillness was so complete that the cubs almost forgot to breathe. Then she opened her eyes, and they caught the glint of something in them that made their fur rise. It was not hunger, and it was not fear, but a strange mix of purpose and knowing. She stood and looked toward the far edge of the hollow, where the trees began again. Her gaze lingered there as though she could see through the darkness beyond. Without a word, she began walking toward it. The cubs exchanged looks. They knew that beyond that line of dead earth was the heart of the forbidden place. Every story they had been told spoke of shadows that swallowed hunters whole and whispers that drove prey mad. And yet she walked straight into it as if following a road she had traveled many times before. The smallest cub hesitated, his paws gripping the cracked soil. The middle cub urged him to turn back, while the oldest kept his eyes fixed on the moving figure. "If she knows the hollow," he whispered, "then she knows things the elders never told us." The smallest cub swallowed hard and followed. The three of them slipped through the broken trees, staying just far enough back to keep her from noticing, or so they thought. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. The trees were not alive, but neither were they fully dead. Their bark was gray and split open in places, showing faint lines of light that pulsed slowly like the veins in a living creature. No leaves grew on the branches, yet a soft glow hung in the air, casting the ground in shades of silver and green. The soil here crunched under their paws like thin ice, and every step felt too loud. The woman stopped beside one of the marked trees and traced her fingers along the glowing lines in its bark. The hum returned, but this time it was softer, warmer, almost like a greeting. She whispered something in the same strange language she had used before. The tree seemed to respond, its light growing brighter for a moment before fading again. The cubs could not understand the words, but they knew she was not speaking to herself. She was speaking to the forest. They crept closer, using the twisted roots as cover. The middle cub's tail brushed against a fallen branch, and it snapped with a sharp crack. The sound rang out in the unnatural stillness. The woman did not turn, but she spoke aloud in their own tongue, without looking back. "You should not be here." Her tone was calm, but it carried an edge that made their paws freeze in place. She stepped away from the tree and kept walking deeper into the hollow. The cubs looked at each other, unsure if she meant to chase them away, or if she was simply warning them. They followed, still drawn by something they could not name. After a while they came to a narrow path cut through the twisted trees. It was not made by claws or paws, but by something larger and older. Strange metal poles stood at intervals along the path, each one half buried in the ground and covered in vines. Faint blue lights glowed on their surfaces, flickering as the woman passed by. The cubs had never seen metal that old, still alive with light. The sight made them feel very small. The woman slowed her pace and ran her hand over one of the poles. A shimmer passed through the air, like heat rising from stone. She stepped through it, and the cubs saw the air ripple around her. It was as if she had crossed an invisible curtain into another place. They hurried to keep up, but when they reached the same spot, they felt a strange push, like walking into deep water. For a moment they could not breathe, then the pressure eased, and they found themselves on the other side. The forest here was even stranger. The ground was marked with huge circular patterns burned into the soil. The lines were straight and perfect, too perfect to be made by tooth or claw. In the center of the largest circle stood a structure unlike anything the cubs had seen before. It was shaped like a dome, but its surface was smooth and black, as if made from the night sky itself. No light reflected from it, yet it seemed to glow from within. The woman walked straight to the dome and placed her palm against its surface. A deep vibration rolled through the ground, and the cubs' ears popped at the pressure in the air. Part of the dome shifted, and a narrow opening appeared, revealing a faint golden light inside. Without hesitation, she stepped through the opening and vanished from sight. The cubs froze. They could run back now and tell the elders. They could leave before whatever was inside knew they were here. But the oldest cub took a step forward, then another. "If she came here to wake something," he said, "we have to know what it is." The others followed reluctantly, their paws trembling as they approached the opening. Inside, the air was warmer and filled with a faint hum that seemed to come from every direction at once. The walls were lined with strange symbols glowing in pale colors. In the center of the room stood a tall pillar covered in moving lights. The woman stood before it, her hands moving across its surface, as if she were playing a silent instrument. The lights shifted and swirled, forming shapes that almost looked like maps. The cubs could not read them, but the patterns felt like rivers and mountains and stars all at once. She spoke softly to the pillar in the same unknown tongue, and the lights responded, growing brighter. Then a voice filled the room, deep and resonant, though no mouth spoke the words. It called her by a name the cubs had never heard. She answered without fear, and the voice replied again, this time in the Red Fang language. "Predator and prey," it said, "are both in danger. The hunter from beyond comes. The guardian must wake." The cubs felt a chill spread through them at the words. The woman looked over her shoulder at them, and for the first time her eyes showed a flicker of something that might have been urgency. "You should leave now," she said. "What is coming will not care what you are." The smallest cub stepped back, but the oldest stayed rooted to the spot, his mind filled with questions. "Who are you?" he asked again. She paused, her hand still on the pillar. "I am what stands between," she said, "and that is all you need to know." The pillar pulsed with light, and the ground shuddered. Somewhere outside, a low roar echoed through the hollow. The woman turned back to the pillar, speaking rapidly in the strange language, as if urging it to move faster. The cubs could feel the air growing heavier, the hum deepening into something that rattled in their chests. The oldest cub took one last look at her before pulling the others toward the exit. As they stepped back into the silver glow of the hollow, they heard the voice from inside one final time. "The guardian wakes." The roar from the hollow's depths rolled through the dead trees, like a storm wind without air. The cubs stopped just beyond the dome, their paws pressed into the cold soil as the sound grew heavier until it seemed to come from inside their bones. It was not the roar of a beast or the howl of a predator. It was too deep, too measured, like the beating of a heart made of stone and metal. The oldest cub felt it in his ribs and in the tips of his claws, and knew that whatever the woman had woken was no living creature of flesh. The ground beneath them trembled in slow pulses, as if answering the sound. The woman's voice carried faintly from within the dome quick, sharp words in that strange language that seemed to cut through the vibration. Then a second voice joined hers. It was not spoken, but it filled the air around them, wrapping itself in the space between heartbeats. The cubs could not tell if they heard it with their ears or felt it in their minds. It spoke in a language they did not know, yet the meaning reached them all the same. "Who calls me after so long?" The woman replied without hesitation. "I am the keeper of the last path," she said, "and the world above is in danger again." The voice answered slow and heavy. "The enemy has returned then." "Yes," she said, "and they are closer than you think." The cubs shivered as the vibrations and the ground shifted, like something massive moving far below the surface. The smallest cub whispered that they should leave before it found them, but the oldest placed a paw on his shoulder and shook his head. "Not yet," he said, "we have to hear this." The golden light from inside the dome spilled brighter into the hollow, painting the cracked ground with moving patterns like flowing water. The woman stepped out through the opening, her face calm, but her eyes sharp with purpose. She carried no weapon, yet the cubs felt as though she was more dangerous than any hunter they had seen. Behind her the voice spoke again, though the dome did not move. "The guardian is not whole," it said. "The long sleep has weakened me. I will need time to rise." The woman looked toward the far line of trees, where the hollow met the living forest. "We may not have time," she said. A sudden crack echoed through the air like wood snapping under great weight. The cubs turned toward the sound and saw nothing at first, but then they noticed the shadows between the trees, shifting where no wind moved. The woman's head tilted slightly, as if she could hear something distant. "They are here," she said quietly, almost to herself. The voice in the ground deepened until the soil beneath their paws buzzed with it. "Then I will wake now and bear the cost," it said. A rumble like distant thunder rolled beneath them, and the earth split in thin lines of light, racing outward from the dome. The trees closest to the hollow shook, shedding gray dust like ash. The cubs crouched low, their ears flat against their heads. The smallest one whispered that the ground felt alive, and the middle one answered that maybe it was. The woman stepped forward, her boots making no sound on the cracking soil. She raised one hand, and from her wrist a thin line of light extended outward, striking one of the glowing poles along the path. The pole flared bright blue, and a ripple of force spread through the hollow. She moved to the next, and did the same, each pole lighting like a chain of stars being born one after another. With each light the hum in the air grew stronger. From deep below came a sound like great stone doors grinding open. The cubs' claws dug into the earth as the ground shifted under them. A shape began to rise in the center of the hollow behind the dome. At first it looked like a hill lifting from the earth, but then they saw the smooth black surface gleaming under the moons. It was metal larger than any den or tower in their territory. The rising shape kept growing until it blocked part of the sky. The woman turned back toward the dome and called out to the voice. "The path is open." The voice replied with a tone that made the cubs first stand on end. "Then let the hunt begin." From the base of the great metal form panels unfolded, revealing long limbs, jointed like those of an insect, but built of shining black metal. The limbs sank into the ground with a deep thud, each step steady and deliberate. The cubs could not tell if it was alive or a machine, but they knew it was awake now. The woman approached one of its massive legs, placing a hand on the smooth surface, as if greeting an old friend. The cubs could feel a faint pulse from it, not unlike the one they had felt earlier through the soil. She looked up at the towering shape and spoke in their own tongue, though softly. "This time we end it before it begins." The ground to the north shook with a new sound. This one was different, sharper, quicker, like claws tearing through wood. The shadows at the edge of the hollow began to break apart, revealing tall, narrow figures moving between the trees. Their eyes glowed faint gold, and their limbs moved with a speed that made the cubs' stomachs knot. The woman's gaze fixed on them, her body still but ready. The voice from the guardian rumbled low and steady. "These are the hunters from beyond. They will not stop." The woman nodded. "Then we will not stop either." She turned her head slightly toward the cubs, as if she had known all along where they were hiding. "Go," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Tell your elders to hide the dens far from here." Do not return until the ground is quiet again." The oldest cub hesitated, torn between fear and the pull to stay, but the look in her eyes told him this was not a request. He nudged the others, and they began to retreat, paws moving quickly over the cracked soil toward the living forest. As they ran, they could still feel the hum in the earth behind them, and hear the first clash of sound as the metal guardian took its first step toward the advancing shapes. The woman's voice rose once more, speaking in that strange language, and the guardian answered with a roar that shook the hollow to its roots. The cubs did not look back until they reached the line where the gray dead trees met the green living ones. From there they saw flashes of blue and gold light tearing across the hollow, and the shadows of great shapes moving in the glow. The sound was not like any battle they had heard before. It was deeper, older, like the world itself was fighting. The smallest cub asked in a trembling voice if the woman was predator or prey. The oldest shook his head, still staring at the distant flashes of light. "Neither," he said softly. "She is something else." The flashes in the hollow grew brighter each moment, as if the moons themselves had fallen to the ground and were striking at the darkness. The cubs could see the great black guardian moving with heavy precision, its metal limbs crashing down in slow but unstoppable steps. Each strike it made sent a shudder through the ground that the cubs could feel even from the edge of the living forest. The tall, golden-eyed shapes moved with unnatural speed, darting around the guardian's legs like insects swarming a larger beast. Yet each time they drew close, a beam of searing blue light swept through them, leaving nothing but drifting ash in the cold air. The woman stood at the base of the guardian, her body small beside its massive form, yet her presence was no less commanding. Her hands moved quickly over the surface of a glowing panel on the guardian's side, and with each touch the machine shifted its aim or adjusted its stance, as if she and it shared a single mind. The cubs could not hear her words from this distance, but they could feel her intent like a steady pulse pushing outward through the chaos. The oldest cub's heart pounded with a mix of fear and awe. He had seen predators fight prey, and predators fight predators, but this was different. This was not a hunt. It was something older, something larger, like the forest itself, deciding to strike at an intruder. A sudden scream tore through the air, sharp and metallic. One of the golden-eye hunters leapt high, slashing at one of the guardian's joints with a blade that gleamed like frozen fire. The blow struck but did not cut deep. The guardian answered with a single crushing step that split the ground open beneath the attacker, swallowing it whole. The earth closed again as if nothing had happened. The cubs flinched at the sight, and the middle cub whispered that they should run before the hunter saw them. But the oldest could not move. He felt drawn, as if he needed to understand why the woman had come, why she fought here in the hollow, when even their fiercest warriors would not set paw in its shadow. Then the guardian's voice filled the air again, deep and resonant like the roll of mountains shifting. It spoke to the woman, yet its words spread through the hollow, so that even the cubs could hear. "You have returned, keeper," it said. "After so many cycles, I did not think you would." The woman's reply was steady and without hesitation. "I gave my word," she said, "and I keep my word." The voice paused, as if remembering. "You were young when we last met, and yet you carry the same fire." The cubs exchanged glances. The way it spoke to her sounded almost like recognition, not of her kind, but of her. As if it had seen her before and remembered her as clearly as the day it had gone to sleep beneath the earth. From the forest edge, more golden-eyed hunters poured into the hollow, their bodies moving in a strange rhythm, like they shared one mind. They fanned out, circling the guardian, but the woman stepped forward, her boots silent even on the cracked soil, and held out a small device that shimmered in her hand. The hunters froze for a single breath, as if they had seen the device before. Then they lunged together, their movements so fast that the cub's eyes could barely follow. The guardian lowered one massive limb, blocking the woman from view, and unleashed a beam of light, so bright it turned the air white for a heartbeat. When the light faded, 3 hunters lay still, their forms already breaking apart into fine dust that swirled in the windless hollow. Yet more kept coming. The guardian's voice deepened. "This will not end unless the heart is broken." The woman nodded and glanced toward the far side of the hollow, where a jagged tear in the ground glowed with faint gold light. The cubs had not noticed it before, but now they could see shapes moving within the crack, smaller than the other hunters, but faster and in greater numbers. She spoke quickly to the guardian, and it began to move toward the tear, each step shaking loose clouds of ash from the dead trees around them. The cubs crept closer, unable to stay away. They moved from shadow to shadow, keeping low, their ears twitching at every sound. The oldest wanted to see what the heart was. He had a feeling that whatever it was would explain why the woman and the guardian fought with such unyielding force. As they drew near, they saw the tear more clearly. It was not a natural break in the earth, but a wound torn open by something vast. From within spilled the smaller hunters, their golden eyes burning like embers. And deep inside the crack, the cubs caught a glimpse of something larger than even the guardian. A mass of shifting black and gold patterns, like molten metal moving in slow ripples. It did not move toward the battle. It waited. The woman's voice cut through the hum, and the guardian answered with a low tone that made the ground quiver. It remembers, the voice said in the red Fang tongue. It remembers the fire of the first war. The cubs felt a chill spread down their spines. The thing inside the crack was alive, and it knew the guardian, and by the way it turned its burning gaze, it knew the woman as well. The first time the woman spoke directly to it, her voice carried no fear. "You have no place here," she said. "This world is not yours to take." The reply came not in sound, but in a pressure that made the cubs' teeth ache. "This world belongs to what is strongest, and you are only flesh and dust." The guardian stepped forward, placing itself between the woman and the crack, its massive form blocking the golden light from touching her. "It may be so," the guardian said, "but some dust will cut stone." With that it brought down both massive limbs in a single strike. The ground shook so violently the cubs fell to their knees. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from the impact, glowing with searing blue light that swallowed the smaller hunters as it spread. The thing inside the tear recoiled with a soundless shiver, and the guardian pressed the attack. The cubs scrambled back from the edge of the hollow, their eyes wide at the sight of two giants meeting in the oldest of wars, not for hunger, not for territory, but for the right of the world itself. The woman never looked away from the battle, her hand still on the device, as if ready to give one final command. For a moment the golden glow dimmed, and the cubs thought the battle might be over. But then the light surged again, brighter than before, and the voice of the thing inside rose until it filled the hollow. "We remember you, keeper," it said, "and this time we will not sleep until your bones are dust." The night of 2 moons cast its pale light over the hollow, and the living forest alike bathing every shadow in silver, and every breath of wind in a strange quiet that felt like the world was waiting for something to begin. The cubs had fled as the woman had told them, but they had not gone far. Instead, they crouched low in the shelter of thick roots at the edge of the trees, their eyes fixed on the strange glow that pulsed from the battleground. The guardian stood like a tower of black stone, its metal limbs shifting slowly, but with the weight of mountains, each step cracking the ground and sending thin streams of light across the soil. The hunters from beyond swarmed around it, their golden eyes like sparks drifting in the air, yet their movements were sharp and fast, each leap a blur against the pale moons. The woman was no longer at the guardian's side. She moved across the hollow in long silent strides, her eyes never leaving the jagged tear in the ground where the heart of the enemy pulsed with molten gold and black. She carried no blade, but in her hands she held the shimmering device, its glow steady and cold, as though it had been made for a single purpose that no one else could fulfill. The wind picked up, carrying the faint metallic scent of the hunters and the deeper smell of stone that had been broken open after countless seasons of silence. Somewhere in the distance a low howl echoed, though it did not belong to any creature of the forest. The cubs shifted uneasily, but none of them spoke. They watched as the woman stopped at a line of cracked soil and knelt, placing the device flat on the ground. The glow spread from it in a ring that raced outward, touching the edges of the hollow and climbing up the twisted trees in thin threads of light. The hunters paused mid-step as though something had seized their minds. Even the great shifting shape within the tear seemed to slow its movements. The guardian's voice rolled out deep enough to make the branches tremble. "You have bound the field, keeper," she answered without turning her head. "It will not hold for long." The guardian advanced, its limbs sinking into the soil, with each step sending deep vibrations that the cubs could feel in their chests. It brought one great arm down upon the tear, striking the ground so hard the air shook like thunder. The golden light inside flared bright enough to blind for a heartbeat, and the pressure in the air grew heavy and sharp. From the glow the voice of the enemy came not as words, but as a force that pushed into the skull and spine. "We will break you as before." The woman rose slowly, her eyes fixed on the molten mass within. "Before you will have to reach me," she said, her tone calm, but carrying a weight that made the cubs shiver. The hunters from beyond surged forward again, faster than before, their movements erratic, as if the binding ring burned their minds. They leapt at the guardian in swarms, but each time one drew close, a sweep of blue light tore through them, leaving nothing but ash. Still more came, drawn by the will of the thing in the tear. The woman stepped forward into their path, moving with a speed the cubs had never seen. She did not strike with claws or blades, but with bursts of white light from her hands, each pulse sending a hunter crashing into the ground, where it crumbled to dust. She moved like the wind, flowing between the strikes of the enemy, and never staying in one place long enough to be caught. Above the hollow, the two moons hung side by side, one silver, one pale red, their light mixing in strange patterns on the ground. The air seemed to hum with the sound of the battle, the deep voice of the guardian, the sharp crack of the woman's light bursts, and the distant, unending roar of the enemy. The cubs could feel it in their bones that this night was one the forest would remember, even if no one lived to speak of it. The guardian reached the edge of the tear again, lowering its head toward the molten shape inside. Its voice rumbled like stones grinding together. "You will go back to your sleep." The enemy's answer came as a surge of golden light that lashed out, striking the guardian's side with a force that made the ground buckle. The cubs saw one of its limbs falter, but it did not fall. Instead it pressed forward, sinking its limbs deep into the edges of the tear, as if to hold it closed by sheer weight. The woman shouted something in the strange language, and the glow from her device flared brighter, sending waves of light through the soil. The hunters screamed in a high, shrill tone, and many broke apart where they stood. But the molten shape inside the tear did not break. It pushed harder, the golden light spilling upward now like liquid fire. The guardian's voice deepened. "Keeper, the heart rises." The woman's reply was a whisper lost to the wind, but whatever she said made the guardian shift its stance, planting itself firmly, as if preparing for a final strike. The cubs could see the tension in every movement of the battle. The night around them seemed to grow tighter, the shadows drawing close, the air holding still between one heartbeat and the next. Then the moons broke through a patch of drifting cloud, and for a brief moment the hollow was bathed in full silver and red light. The woman raised both hands toward the tear, the device floating between them, its glow now so bright it lit the twisted trees like dawn. The guardian moved with her, lowering its head until the beam from its core met the light from her device in a single point that struck the heart of the enemy. The golden mass recoiled, shuddering violently, its shape breaking apart into fragments of molten light that fell back into the depths of the tear. The voice from within roared again, but it was weaker, now more distant. The woman stepped forward, pouring every shred of the device's glow into the crack. The guardian's beam grew sharper, slicing through the golden light like a spear of the coldest fire. The cubs clung to the roots, their eyes wide, their fur bristling, as the ground beneath them shook like a living thing. The roar faded to a low rumble, and the golden glow sank away, leaving only darkness in the depths of the tear. The woman lowered her hands, the device dimming to a faint pulse. The guardian straightened slowly, its massive form casting a long shadow across the hollow. The voice of the enemy came one last time. "We will remember, Keeper." And then there was silence. The night of two moons held its breath, the silver and red light washing over the still hollow, where ash drifted in the air like cold snow. The woman turned toward the forest, her gaze passing over the place where the cubs hid, though she said nothing. The guardian spoke in a low voice meant for her alone, yet the cubs still heard the words. "This battle is done. The war is not." She nodded once and walked toward the edge of the hollow, her steps as silent as they had been the first time they saw her. The cubs did not move until she was gone into the shadows of the living forest, and even then they stayed quiet for a long time, listening to the empty night, wondering if they had seen a victory or only the first strike of something far greater. The hollow lay quiet beneath the twin moons, yet the silence was not the same as before, for now it carried the weight of something that had happened that would not fade even if seasons passed, and new trees grew where the soil had cracked. The golden light was gone, and the air no longer trembled with the deep voice of the enemy, but the memory of it clung to every twisted branch like frost that does not melt. The cubs remained hidden among the roots at the forest's edge, their eyes searching for any sign of movement, and their ears straining for any whisper of sound from below, but only the faint sigh of the wind reached them. The guardian stood still in the center of the hollow, its great limbs sunk into the cracked soil as though it had returned to sleep, yet its head remained lowered, and its core still glowed faintly, like an ember in the ashes of a fire that had burned too long. The cubs felt certain it was not gone, only resting, as if watching over the place until it was needed again. The woman was gone from sight, swallowed by the living forest in the same silent way she had first appeared, but the sense of her presence lingered as if the ground itself remembered her steps. The oldest cub let out a slow breath. He had not realized he was holding the middle cub, shifted his paws, restless and unsure whether to be glad or afraid, while the smallest stared wide-eyed at the guardian, as though trying to see through the black metal to whatever thoughts might dwell inside it. They spoke in low voices, the oldest saying they should return to the den before the elders sent a search. The smallest saying they could not leave without knowing where she had gone. The middle cub torn between fear of the hollow and a growing pull to follow her. They moved along the forest's edge, careful to keep the hollow in sight without stepping into its soil, and after some time they found a trail. It was faint, almost hidden under the fallen leaves, but the marks on the ground were too evenly spaced to be the steps of an animal. The oldest recognized them as her tracks. She had moved quickly, yet without disturbing more than necessary, as though she had known the forest would remember every broken twig and crushed blade of grass. The cubs followed in silence, their senses stretched thin to catch even the faintest sound ahead. The trail led them to a stream where the water moved quietly under the moonlight, and there she was standing by the bank, her head bowed as she washed her hands in the cold current. The cubs froze, uncertain if they should approach, yet before they could decide she spoke, without turning. "I told you to go back to your den." Her voice was not angry, but it carried the tone of one who expected to be obeyed. Still the oldest stepped forward, unable to stop the question that had burned at his chest since the first moment they saw her. "What are you?" She looked over her shoulder, her eyes catching the silver of the moonlight, and for a moment there was no sound but the flowing of the water. Then she answered in a voice that was neither sharp nor soft, "I am not predator, and I am not prey. I am the wall that stands between them." The cubs did not understand at first, but something in her tone told them it was the truth. She turned back to the stream, letting the water run over her fingers, as if washing away not just dirt, but the memory of battle. The smallest cub asked why she had fought for them, why she had woken the guardian, when she could have walked away. She did not answer at once, her gaze fixed on the ripples in the water. When she finally spoke, her words were slow and heavy. "There are enemies in the dark who see all life as theirs to take your forest, your clan, your way of living. They are nothing to them but a meal or a tool. I have seen what they do, and I will not let them do it again." The cubs felt the weight of her words, though they could not imagine a world beyond their own, yet her eyes told them she had seen such a place and survived it. She stepped out of the stream, shaking the water from her hands, and began to walk deeper into the forest. The cubs followed without thinking until she stopped and turned to face them. "You should not see the next part," she said. "What comes now is not for your eyes." The oldest wanted to protest, but her gaze held him. Still, it was not a command in the way the elders gave commands. It was a truth as unshakable as the season. She turned again and was gone between the trees, her steps making no sound, and the forest closing behind her. The cubs stood in the moonlight for a long time before beginning the journey back to their den. They spoke little on the way, each lost in thought. When they arrived, the elders were waiting, their faces shadowed by the firelight. The oldest cub tried to explain what they had seen, but the words felt too small to carry the weight of it. The elders listened in silence, their eyes narrowing at the mention of the hollow and the guardian, yet they did not scold the cubs for disobeying. Instead, they sent the others away and kept the three alone with them. One elder asked what the woman had been, predator or prey. The cubs looked at one another. The smallest shook his head. "She was not either," he said. The middle cub agreed. She was something else. The oldest thought of her words, and the way she had stood before the guardian and the hunters, and the thing in the tear, without fear. She is the wall between, he said. The elders looked at each other and nodded, as if they understood, though they did not explain what they knew. In the days that followed, the forest seemed quieter than before, yet the cubs could not shake the feeling of being watched, not by an enemy, but by something vast and patient. The hollow remained still, its cracked soil untouched, yet the faint hum of the guardian could be heard if one stood close enough. At night, the cubs began to speak among themselves using a new word. They had made it was a word that belonged to neither the tongue of the predators nor the prey. It meant the one who stands between, the one who fights for both, without belonging to either. They never told the elders the word, but they spoke it when they thought of her, and it carried a feeling that was not fear or worship, but something closer to trust. They knew they might never see her again, yet they also knew that if the golden-eyed hunters returned, or if the voice from the tear rose, once more she would come, and the guardian would wake, and the forest would remember the night of 2 moons. Seasons passed, the cubs grew into hunters themselves, yet the memory of her never faded. Sometimes, on quiet nights, they thought they saw her moving between the trees, a pale figure who left no trail and carried the scent of metal, stone, and rain. Sometimes they thought they heard the low hum of the guardian far away, like the heartbeat of the earth. Sometimes they dreamed of the hollow and woke with the feeling that something vast had just been listening. And so the word they had made stayed with them, passed in whispers to their own young, never written, never spoken to outsiders. It was not a name, and it was not a title. It was a promise that there would always be one who stood between predator and prey, one who would face the darkness, so that the forest could sleep under the light of the moons unafraid.